When you use the Interact Social Security Administration system, everything is driven by the highly configurable policy setup. When we say that everything in Interact is configurable, it means that we can configure the rules for workflow and processes by changing the policy setup without having to involve programmers to change underlying source code. You can see that there are different menus here. These are setup menus, which allow you to configure the system. This is basically where you tell the system what you want from it, how you want it to operate. This applies to every aspect of the system. Once that policy setup is done and the system is fully configured, then you can perform activities and process transactions, in this case, those related to Social Security. Under the activity menus, you will see all the various activities which can be performed in the system based on the setup configuration. It starts with identification or ID management, and then continues with medical affidavits, bank information, and of course you will need rules and setup for tax or contribution filings. All settings for this can be modified as required. Then you have different rules around the payment of contributions, either by regular employers or by self-employed and voluntary contributors. The setup will allow you to configure the rules for Social Security benefit payments, the benefit payment adjustments, the penalties, the tax refunds, how messages between parties can be exchanged, and how notifications should be sent out, and more. Finally, there is a long list of options to choose from when defining the policies in regards to compliance. On top of that, you have, of course, reports for each area. There is a wealth of reports. All reports can be run based on the user's access rights, and the user can be authorized to export them to PDF, Excel, and Word. In short, the setup area is where we define how we want the system to work. For example, if I go to General Setup, I can first of all choose the country for which we want to configure the system, because this system is designed to be flexible enough to be used in any country. Some of the other basic elements in the setup are choosing the logo, the name of the administration that we're setting it up for, and many other parameters. You have the ability to define Social Security numbers. The format structure of these identifying numbers can have any number of segments and segment separators. These numbers can be automatically generated or manually generated. The segments can contain alphanumeric or numeric characters. The same logic applies to the Employer Identification Number, the Social Security Authority registration numbers, and any other relevant numbers. You can also choose to use temporary or suspense numbers and more. All of these parameters are choices which will affect how the system operates from there on out. You can choose the portal's welcome text, for example, which should appear for any user who visits the portal. You can also configure the application and registration forms for claims and other processes. Every single application form will come with its own workflow and logic here. It will have a choice of mandatory or optional supporting documents to be included when submitting the form. Those specific attachments can be chosen here, and you can also add workflow actors who will be involved in the workflow process related to a particular application or registration form. So the supporting documents, the workflow, and many other elements can be defined for each individual form that is to be used in the portal. Such a form could be, for example, a claim for a funeral grant or an application for registration as an employee. This is a form that we saw being used by the employees earlier in our demonstration. There are a lot of configuration capabilities behind this, because such forms and their logic typically differ in each country or Social Security entity. Another really important element in benefit calculations are the Social Security credit units. How do you earn such credit units when you pay into Social Security? The rules may change over time, and the system can be set up to accommodate that too. There usually is a minimum contribution that you have to contribute in order to earn a credit, and there are maximums or limits beyond which no additional credit can be earned. The rules and calculation of earned credits may differ between weekly or biweekly, monthly or quarterly earnings, and so on. All of these matters are flexibly configured without source code changes. Next, we look at the basic data that can be configured around jobs, the job types that you're going to be using when you classify jobs, etc. This type of classification of essential data is important and will be very different in each country, so it must be fully flexible. In fact, the setup of Interact SSAS can be divided in two main categories: Foundation Setup and Policy Setup. The Foundation Setup consists of the most general elements which apply in all cases to all policies, while the Policy Setup is more particular to specific individual policies. Under the Foundation Setup, we can find setup concerning financial details, but also group classification options and filing and payment calendars. You can define your own groups which you will use to classify employers, employees, and beneficiaries. For example, for employer groups, I might have private sector employers or employers in the agricultural or tourism sector. These can then be managed separately from those employers who are involved with banking and finance, and so on. This allows the authority to run separate reports, but also to devise distinct policies which may only apply to employers in a particular group or set of groups. Naturally, you will have the ability to define your calendars for contribution filing, which is the frequency with which each employer has to report salaries and contributions, for which you can see the contribution return periods right here. The rules can be entirely different when it comes to filing of salary and contribution reports for the self-employed and the voluntary contributors. On the other hand, there are calendars to be defined to set the rules around the payment of benefits. The benefit payment calendar can be, again, based on the frequency and the type of benefits. You can set this up the way you like. You can have weekly or biweekly benefit payments versus monthly benefit payments, and so on. In each case, in each scenario, you can choose how you want the system to work based on the Social Security laws in the country. This also implies that the system can easily accommodate and support future changes in Social Security laws, whether they are minor changes in rates or the introduction of an entirely new benefit. In either scenario, these changes can be supported by changing the foundation and policy parameters without the need for complex source code changes. If we dig deeper in this policy setup area, we will notice that we have the ability to set up all kinds of master tables, as they are sometimes called. You can create fixed choices for things like reasons for application rejection, reasons for benefit payment adjustment, and many other reasons. The result of having such flexible options is that for any transactions for which you need to track some additional data, you can enforce a validated structure in this data. This will be very helpful for reporting purposes and many other reasons. All these validation tables are user-defined. You can also use them for collection areas, inspectors, standardized industry codes, and much more. If a fixed set of third-party entities play an important role in the Social Security process, these can be predefined also. Finally, let's also look at the compliance module. The compliance module in Interact SSAS is a very important module which ensures that employers pay the right amounts on time and are in full compliance with their obligations under the applicable Social Security laws. One of the key processes managed in the compliance module is the element of audits. Audits can be scheduled based on a predefined performance cycle, or they can be initiated as a one-off audit for a particular reason. While some audits will be randomly assigned, others will be conducted for very particular reasons. The scope of these audits can be predefined, just as the documents which need to be submitted during the audit. These document requirements may differ depending on the audits that you have. The next thing to determine are the actions that can result from an audit and the legal actions or lawsuits that may take place if the employer still does not comply. Beyond compliance, we'll look a little closer still at the individual tax or contribution policies. When you select a specific tax or contribution policy, you will find the applicable contribution rates right here, for example, for the year 2022. These are the contribution rates currently in place in this setup. The system supports the use of different classification codes, which will lead to different contribution rates. For example, we have employee types who are by law entitled to a particular redundancy benefit, while others are not entitled to this redundancy benefit due to the nature of their employment. On the other hand, we have separate rules for the self-employed and for voluntary contributors. For each one, the Social Security contribution rules, and therefore the applicable rates, are different. Apart from this, you also have the detailed policy definition for benefit entitlements. Because there are so many parameters to be considered here, the system requires tables to manage this. Let's take a look at a sickness benefit. The sickness benefit is right here. This screen allows an administrator to, first of all, define the benefit in detail. You can have a benefit description right here. You can have an application form that will be used by anyone applying for this benefit and more. You should be able to see here that an administrator can control what data should be collected in this particular form. Now, when somebody is applying for this particular benefit, the rate that will be used to calculate the benefit consists of an entire rate table. And here, for example, it says that you're going to use a weekly rate, which is 65% of the insurable earning. The system is set up to use the concept of insurable earnings, and in this case, it uses the previous 13 weeks of insurable earnings. The settings also indicate that the person must have worked on the last workday prior to claiming the sickness benefit. Otherwise, they would not be entitled to this particular benefit. Now, the reason why you have these particular columns here is because in the benefits class definition, the choices of the parameters settings determine that these specific policies are to be used. Therefore, if we go look at the sickness benefit here, you will observe that these same criteria that showed up in my earlier table were specifically set to be included. One of them is the last day of work, for example. So basically, in Interact SSAS, you can first create the structure and then set the parameters of the table that will be used to subsequently calculate a particular benefit entitlement. That is the true power of this system. This implies that if you have some unique rules and codes that need to be used to calculate an entirely new type of benefit, whether it's a pension or a regular benefit or a grant, then all you need to do is first define the rules. You start by classifying this new benefit within a class of benefits. A new benefit may fit within an existing class of benefits or could require a completely separate and new class of benefits. Regardless, you will have the ability to create classes and define what criteria will drive the calculation of that particular benefit entitlement. As a result, the system will generate a rate table based on those settings, and those parameters will then be used to calculate this particular benefit. Now, do keep in mind, when you look in here, you're looking at setup screens, which means these are screens to be used for configuration done by a consultant or a system administrator. These are not screens that are used by a regular end user of the system, and they are of course definitely not used or seen by the general public. These screens are only used during the setup of the system, and we're only showing them to you to show you the flexibility of the system, the configurability, so that you can see that there is no need for source code changes really to be able to support the needs of your organization. Even if the laws change, or if small or large changes occur in the regulatory environment, or changes occur from an operational point in the administration of Social Security contributions or benefit claims. Best of all, Interact SSAS will evolve over time to be even more flexible and user-friendly to support changes with minimal effort and impact on users. Thanks to the configurability of the system, a typical user will only see those elements on the screen, which are needed by the user to process a specific transaction. That is the basis of the design of Interact SSAS. Flexibility and user-friendly design to minimize the cost of operating the system and to ensure the long-term benefits of standardizing on this application.